What happened in 1776 explains why America looks the way it does today, why we have guns, distrust government, and believe anyone can become anything. One document, 56 signatures, and a war that should have been impossible to win. Most people think America won independence because of great generals and brave soldiers. That's not what happened. January 1st, 1776, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The Continental Congress is in session. Delegates from 13 British colonies. They've been meeting for over a year, debating, arguing, writing letters to King George III. They're not talking about independence. They're talking about reconciliation. Most colonists in January 1776 still consider themselves British. Loyal subjects of the crown, they don't want independence. They want their rights as Englishmen respected. The war has already started. Lexington and Concord happened 9 months ago. April 19, 1775. The shot heard round the world. But that wasn't a war for independence. That was a protest gone violent. Colonists defending their weapon stockpile from British confiscation. Even after shooting started, most colonists thought this was temporary, a dispute, a negotiation with guns. In 6 months, everything will change. January 10, 1776. A pamphlet appears in Philadelphia, 47 pages, anonymous author. Title, Common Sense. The author is Thomas Paine, a 38-year-old English immigrant, failed corset maker, failed teacher, failed tax collector. He's been in America for less than 2 years. Arrived in Philadelphia in November 1774 with nothing. No money, no connections. Seasick and broke. Benjamin Franklin gave him a letter of introduction. Paine got a job editing a magazine. And then he wrote 47 pages that changed history. Common Sense isn't like other political pamphlets. It's not written in the flowery, educated language of lawyers and philosophers. It's written in plain English. The kind ordinary people speak. And it says what nobody else is willing to say. Independence isn't just necessary. It's obvious. Paine tears apart the idea of monarchy. Calls King George III a tyrant. Says hereditary rule is absurd. Of more worth is one honest man to society than all the crowned ruffians that ever lived. He makes the case for self-government, for a republic, for breaking free completely. And he sells 120,000 copies in 3 months. In a population of 2.5 million, that's equivalent to selling 30 million copies today. More people read Common Sense than voted in the 2024 presidential election. Proportionally. It's not just a bestseller. It's a cultural earthquake. Suddenly, independence isn't a fringe idea. It's the conversation everyone's having. In taverns, in churches, in homes. Thomas Paine, the failed corset maker who'd been in America for 14 months, just convinced a continent to rebel. March 17, 1776. Boston, Massachusetts. The British Army evacuates. After an 8-month siege, they're leaving, sailing away on ships. General George Washington has positioned cannons on Dorchester Heights, overlooking the city. The British can't defend Boston anymore. This is the first major colonial victory. And it changes everything. Because if the British can be forced out of Boston, their stronghold in New England, maybe they can be beaten. Maybe this isn't hopeless. Washington doesn't chase the British. He lets them leave. They sail to Halifax, Nova Scotia, regroup, plan their next move. But the psychological impact is enormous. The British aren't invincible. They can retreat. They can be outmaneuvered. And in Philadelphia, the Continental Congress starts thinking bigger. June 7, 1776. Philadelphia. Richard Henry Lee, delegate from Virginia, stands before the Continental Congress. He reads a resolution. 3 parts. Resolved that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is, and ought to be, totally dissolved. There it is, independence, formally proposed. The room erupts. Delegates argue. Some support it immediately. Others hesitate. Pennsylvania and New York oppose. They're not ready. Their colonial assemblies haven't authorized independence. South Carolina wants guarantees about slavery. They won't support independence if it threatens their economy. This is the problem. 13 colonies, 13 different interests, 13 different fears. John Adams, delegate from Massachusetts, pushes hard for independence, argues, debates, cajoles. He later writes to his wife, Abigail, objects of the most stupendous magnitude, measures in which the lives and liberties of millions, born and unborn, are most essentially interested, are now before us. We are in the very midst of a revolution, the most complete, unexpected, and remarkable of any in the history of nations. He knows what's at stake. This isn't just politics. This is treason. Congress delays the vote, needs time, needs consensus. But they form a committee to draft a declaration. Just in case. 5 men, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, Robert Livingston. They choose Jefferson to write the first draft. He's 33 years old, a lawyer from Virginia, known for his writing. He has 17 days. June 11th to 28th, 1776, Philadelphia. Thomas Jefferson sits in a rented room, 2nd floor, Market and 7th Street. He's writing, revising, crossing out, rewriting. He's not inventing new ideas. He's synthesizing existing philosophy. John Locke, natural rights, life, liberty, property. Enlightenment thinkers. Government derives power from consent of the governed. Jefferson's job isn't originality, it's clarity, making the case so clearly, so powerfully, that it can't be ignored. He writes in the Declaration that King George III has violated the colonists' rights, lists 27 specific grievances. Some are legitimate: taxation without representation, quartering soldiers in private homes, dissolving colonial legislatures. Some are exaggerated, blaming the king for things Parliament did. But the point isn't accuracy. The point is justification. You don't declare independence because things are going well. You declare independence because staying is intolerable. Jefferson includes one section that will cause massive controversy. A paragraph condemning King George for allowing the slave trade, calling slavery a cruel war against human nature itself. Here's the problem. Jefferson owns over 600 enslaved people. He's writing about the immorality of slavery while profiting from it. And the southern colonies, South Carolina and Georgia, especially, will never accept this language. When the draft goes to Congress for debate, that paragraph gets deleted. The Declaration of Independence, the document declaring all men are created equal, protects slavery to keep southern colonies on board. That contradiction will haunt America for the next 250 years. July 2nd, 1776, Philadelphia. The Continental Congress votes on Richard Henry Lee's resolution. 12 colonies vote yes. New York abstains. They're still waiting for instructions from their assembly. July 2nd, 1776 is the day America actually declared independence. John Adams writes to Abigail, "The 2nd day of July, 1776, will be the most memorable epoch in the history of America. I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival." He's off by 2 days. Because on July 4th, 1776, Congress finishes debating Jefferson's declaration. They adopt the final text. July 4th becomes the date we celebrate. Not because that's when independence was declared, but because that's when the explanation was approved. The declaration itself isn't signed on July 4th. Most delegates sign on August 2nd. Some sign even later. But July 4th, 1776 is when they document the words become official. And those words matter, because this isn't just a political declaration. It's a statement of philosophy. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. 35 words. The most important sentence ever written in American history. Here's what most people don't understand about July 4th, 1776. It's not a victory, it's a promise. The war hasn't been won. It's barely started. The British Army is the most powerful military force in the world. Professional soldiers. The best navy. Unlimited resources from the wealthiest empire on earth. The Continental Army is a collection of farmers, merchants, and volunteers. Poorly trained, poorly equipped, constantly running out of supplies. On paper, this war is unwinnable. George Washington knows it. John Adams knows it. Every delegate who votes for independence knows it. When they sign the Declaration, they're signing their own death warrants. If Britain wins, every signer will be hanged as a traitor. Benjamin Franklin, the oldest signer at 70, reportedly says, "We must, indeed, all hang together, or most assuredly, we shall all hang separately." It's not a joke. It's the truth. And in the summer of 1776, as the Declaration is being signed, the British are preparing the largest military expedition in their history. 32,000 troops, 10,000 sailors, 400 ships. Heading for New York, the war is about to get much worse. So what changed between January and July 1776? Not military victories. Boston was evacuated, but the war was far from won. Not economic conditions. The colonies were struggling. Inflation, shortages, chaos. What changed was the idea. Thomas Paine convinced people that independence wasn't radical. It was common sense. The British convinced people that reconciliation wasn't possible. By sending more troops, by declaring the colonies in rebellion, by treating them as enemies, not subjects. And the Continental Congress realized, we're already at war. We might as well fight for something bigger than tax policy, because that's what this started as, a tax dispute. The Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, the Tea Act. Colonists didn't want to pay taxes to a parliament where they had no representation. But by July 1776, it's not about taxes anymore. It's about self-determination, about the right to govern themselves, about rejecting monarchy entirely. That's the transformation, from a protest to a revolution. And it happened in 6 months. But here's the uncomfortable truth that gets left out of the elementary school version. This wasn't a unified movement. It was a civil war. About 1/3 of colonists supported independence. The Patriots. About 1/3 opposed it. The Loyalists. They remained loyal to Britain. Some fought for the British. Many fled to Canada after the war. About 1/3 didn't care, just wanted to be left alone. The American Revolution wasn't 13 colonies uniting against a common enemy. It was neighbors turning on each other. Loyalist property was confiscated. Families were driven out. Communities were torn apart. It was brutal. It was personal. It was messy. But that's not the story we tell on July 4th. We tell the story of unity, courage. Founding fathers in powdered wigs signing a document. The reality was more complicated and more human. Thomas Paine, the man who started it all with common sense dies penniless in 1809. Despised, forgotten, because after independence, he kept writing, kept challenging authority, criticized religion, criticized George Washington. America loved him when he was useful, discarded him when he became inconvenient. That's the other side of 1776, the side we don't celebrate. But the words survived. All men are created equal. Those words outlasted the hypocrisy, outlasted slavery, outlasted the men who wrote them, and 250 years later, we're still trying to live up to them. In July 1776, they were a declaration, a promise, a hope. They weren't reality, not even close, but they became a standard, a measuring stick, a challenge to every generation since. That's the legacy of 1776, not what America was, but what America claimed it wanted to be. And the gap between those two things, between the promise and the reality, is the story of the next 250 years. The Declaration was adopted on July 4th, but the war to make it real was just beginning. The Declaration of Independence is 1,320 words long. Only 35 of them explain why it matters. July 4th, 1776, Philadelphia. The Continental Congress approves the final text of the Declaration of Independence. It's been debated for 2 days. Jefferson's draft has been edited, cut, revised. About 25% of what Jefferson wrote has been removed. The section condemning slavery? Gone. The passionate language blaming King George for every colonial grievance? Toned down. What remains is 1,320 words. 5 sections. One revolutionary idea. But here's what almost nobody knows. The Declaration isn't a legal document. It doesn't create laws, doesn't establish a government, doesn't outline rights or responsibilities. It's a breakup letter. And like any breakup letter, most of it is listing complaints about the other person. Let's break down what's actually in the Declaration of Independence. Section 1, the preamble, the part everyone knows. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, then comes the famous part. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. 35 words. That's it. 35 words that would reshape human history. But let's pause here. Because those words didn't mean in 1776 what they mean in 2026. All men are created equal, not women, not enslaved people, not Native Americans, not even all white men-only property owners could vote in most states. All men in 1776 meant white male property owners, maybe 6% of the population. So why do these words matter? Because they're not descriptive, they're aspirational. Jefferson isn't saying all men are equal. He's saying all men are created equal. It's a claim about nature, about inherent worth, about rights that exist before government, not because of government. And once you say that, once you make that claim, you've created a standard that every excluded group will use to demand inclusion. Women in 1848. All men and women are created equal. Abolitionists in the 1850s. All men includes enslaved people. Civil rights activists in the 1960s. Created equal means equal treatment under law. LGBTQ activists in the 2000s. Unalienable rights include marriage equality. The words were hypocritical in 1776, but they were powerful enough to outlast the hypocrisy. Then comes the philosophy that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. This is the revolutionary part. In 1776, most of the world is ruled by kings, monarchs who claim divine right, power inherited through bloodlines. Jefferson is saying, that's backwards. Government doesn't grant rights. Government exists to protect rights. And government only has power because the people consent to be governed. If the government violates rights, the people have the right to change or abolish it. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government. This isn't just a declaration of independence from Britain. It's a declaration that all people have the right to rebel against tyranny, It's a justification for revolution. Anywhere, anytime, and it terrified monarchs across Europe. Because if Americans can overthrow their king, what's stopping the French? The Spanish? The Russians? Spoiler alert, nothing. The French Revolution starts 13 years later. Section 2. The list of grievances, the part nobody reads. After the preamble, the Declaration spends 27 paragraphs listing complaints against King George III. This section is 919 words, about 70% of the entire document. It's the longest part, and almost nobody remembers any of it. Here are some of the grievances. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. Translation. The king vetoed colonial laws. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly. Translation. He shut down colonial legislatures when they disagreed with him. He has kept among us, in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. Translation. British troops stationed in the colonies without permission. For quartering large bodies of armed troops among us. Double quotes. Translation. Forcing colonists to house soldiers in their homes. This is why the Third Amendment exists. No soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner. Nobody talks about the Third Amendment. It's the forgotten amendment, but it's in the Constitution because of 1776, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world. Translation. Trade restrictions. Economic control. For imposing taxes on us without our consent. Translation. The core issue. The whole reason this started. But notice, taxes aren't even the first complaint. They're buried in the middle. Because by July 1776, this isn't just about taxes anymore. It's about sovereignty. Here's the grievance that was deleted, the one Jefferson fought to keep in. He has waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere, or to incur miserable death in their transportation thither. Jefferson is blaming King George for the slave trade. The problem? Jefferson owns 600 enslaved people. George Washington owns 317. Many signers of the Declaration are slaveholders. They're blaming the king for a system they actively participate in and profit from. And the delegates from South Carolina and Georgia refuse to sign if this language stays in, so it gets cut. The Declaration of Independence, the document proclaiming universal human equality, deletes the anti-slavery clause to preserve unity. That decision has consequences. 89 years later, 620,000 Americans die in a civil war over slavery. Because the problem wasn't solved in 1776, it was postponed. Section 3. Failed attempts at reconciliation after listing grievances. The Declaration says, "We tried to fix this peacefully." In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. This is important for the international audience. The Declaration isn't just for Americans. It's for Britain, France, Spain, potential allies, and enemies. They need to show they exhausted peaceful options. That independence is the last resort, not the first. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. Translation. We begged. They ignored us. This makes the revolution defensible. Self-defense, not aggression. Section 4. The actual declaration finally, after 1,200 words of preamble and complaints, the Declaration actually declares independence. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right, ought to be free and independent states. Notice, United States of America, lowercase u. They're not thinking of one nation. They're thinking of 13 states, united for this purpose. The United States as a single country comes later. That fight takes another 11 years. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. That last line isn't rhetorical. It's literal. If Britain wins, the signers will be executed, their property confiscated, their families disgraced. They're betting everything, and the odds are against them. Now let's talk about what's not in the Declaration. No mention of democracy. The word democracy doesn't appear. Not once, because the founders didn't want democracy. They wanted a republic. Democracy meant mob rule, chaos, the tyranny of the majority. A republic meant elected representatives, rule of law, checks and balances. The founders feared democracy almost as much as they feared monarchy. No mention of how the new government will work. The Declaration doesn't create a structure. No Congress, no president, no courts. That comes later. First, the Articles of Confederation, 1781. Then the Constitution, 1787. The Declaration just says, we're breaking up. We'll figure out the details later. No guarantee of rights. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness sounds good, but there's no enforcement mechanism. The Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments guaranteeing specific freedoms, doesn't come until 1791, 15 years after the Declaration. Freedom of speech, religion, press, assembly? Not in the Declaration. The right to a fair trial? Not in the Declaration. The Declaration makes philosophical claims. It doesn't create legal protections. Here's the part that's easy to miss. The Declaration changed meaning over time. In 1776, it's a justification for rebellion, a legal argument, a political document. By 1860, it's a moral argument against slavery. Abraham Lincoln, in the 1850s, constantly quotes the Declaration. All men are created equal becomes the rallying cry for abolition. The South responds, the Declaration was only about white men. Jefferson owned slaves. The founders didn't mean black people. Lincoln says, the founders may not have meant it that way, but the words say what they say, and the words are bigger than the men who wrote them. By 1963, it's the foundation of the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King Jr. at the Lincoln Memorial. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. He's not quoting the Constitution. He's quoting the Declaration. Because the Declaration makes a promise. And every generation since has demanded America keep that promise. By 2026, it's still the standard we measure ourselves against. Marriage equality, immigration rights, voting rights, economic justice. Every debate about who belongs, who counts, who has rights, it comes back to 1776. All men are created equal? Do we mean it? All? Really? So why did Jefferson write pursuit of happiness instead of property? John Locke, the philosopher Jefferson borrowed from, said the three natural rights were life, liberty, and property. Jefferson changed property to pursuit of happiness. Why? Some historians think it's because property was too narrow, too materialistic. Others think it's because property would have included enslaved people, and Jefferson didn't want to confront that contradiction directly. Maybe both are true, but pursuit of happiness opens the door wider. It's not just about owning things. It's about living a meaningful life on your own terms. That's a much bigger promise than property rights. And it's a promise America has never fully kept. But the fact that the promise exists, that it's written down, signed, declared, that matters. Because you can't break a promise that was never made. The Declaration made the promise. And 250 years later, we're still fighting over what it means. Here's the final thing most people don't know. The Declaration wasn't signed on July 4th. July 4th, 1776. Congress approves the text. July 19th, 1776. Congress orders the Declaration to be engrossed, written on parchment in fancy calligraphy. August 2nd, 1776. Most delegates sign the engrossed copy. Some delegates sign even later. Matthew Thornton doesn't sign until November. And some delegates who voted for independence in July never signed at all. So when we celebrate July 4th, we're celebrating the approval of the text, not the signing. John Adams thought we'd celebrate July 2nd, the day independence was actually voted on. He was wrong. We celebrate the words, not the vote, because the words are what lasted. The vote was political, strategic, temporary. The words were universal, timeless, revolutionary. All men are created equal. In 1776, those words were a lie. In 2026, they're still not fully true, but they're the most powerful lie ever told, because people believed it enough to fight for it, die for it, demand it be made real. Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense and convinced people independence was possible. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration and convinced them it was righteous. But the war to make it real, that was just beginning. And it would nearly fail. Multiple times. Britain had the world's most powerful navy, professional army, and unlimited resources. America had farmers with rifles. This shouldn't have worked. August 27, 1776. Long Island, New York. 7 weeks after the Declaration of Independence. George Washington commands about 10,000 Continental Army soldiers, defending New York City, positioned across Brooklyn Heights. Facing him, 32,000 British and Hessian troops, the largest expeditional force Britain has ever assembled. Over 400 ships in New York Harbor, cannons, cavalry, professional soldiers who've been training since childhood. On paper, this isn't a battle, it's an execution. The British attack at dawn, flanking maneuver. The Continental Army is surrounded on 3 sides. Washington's forces collapse, panic, retreat becomes rout. By evening, the Continental Army is trapped, backs against the East River, British forces closing in. If the British press the attack the next morning, the war is over. Washington is captured. The revolution dies 7 weeks after it's declared, but the British don't attack. General William Howe hesitates, wants to avoid casualties, thinks Washington will surrender. That hesitation saves the revolution. On the night of August 29th, under cover of fog, Washington evacuates. 9,000 soldiers. Across the East River, in small boats, silent, oars wrapped in cloth. By morning, the Continental Army is gone. Escaped to Manhattan. It's not a victory. It's barely a survival. And it sets the tone for the next 5 years. America won't win the Revolutionary War. They'll just refuse to lose. Here's the reality of the Continental Army in 1776. They're not professional soldiers. Most are farmers, shopkeepers, laborers. They signed up for short enlistments, 6 months, maybe a year, then they go home. There's no unified training, no standardized equipment. Some have rifles, some have muskets, some have hunting weapons. Many don't have shoes. They're paid irregularly, often not at all. The Continental Congress has no power to tax, so there's no money. Soldiers are promised land, pensions, supplies. Most promises aren't kept. Disease kills more men than combat. Dysentery, smallpox, typhus. Camps are filthy. Sanitation is non-existent. Desertion is constant. Soldiers just walk away. Go home. Nobody can stop them. By December 1776, the Continental Army that started with 20,000 men is down to about 3,000. And those 3,000 are starving, freezing, and losing. Washington has lost every major battle since Long Island. September 15th, British take Manhattan. September 16th, Battle of Harlem Heights, minor American victory, but retreat continues. October 28th, Battle of White Plains, American defeat. November 16th, Fort Washington falls. 3,000 Americans captured, largest surrender of the war. By December, Washington is retreating through New Jersey. British forces pursuing. The revolution is dying. Thomas Paine, marching with the army, writes another pamphlet, The American Crisis. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. It's a rallying cry, but it's also desperate, because without a victory, a real, tangible victory, the revolution will collapse from within. December 25th, 1776, Christmas night. Washington makes a decision. He's going to attack, not defensively, not retreat, attack the target, Trenton, New Jersey. A garrison of about 1,400 Hessian soldiers, German mercenaries, hired by Britain. The plan: cross the Delaware River at night. In winter, during a storm, march 9 miles. Attack at dawn. It's insane. The river is freezing. Chunks of ice floating. The weather is brutal. If the boats capsize, the army drowns. If the Hessians are prepared, the army is slaughtered. But Washington has no choice. His army is falling apart. Enlistments expire in days. Men are leaving. If he doesn't do something bold, there won't be an army by January. At 6 p.m. on Christmas, Washington begins crossing. 2,400 men, 18 cannons, horses. In Durham, boats large, flat-bottomed barges. The crossing takes 9 hours. Supposed to be finished by midnight. Delays, ice, storm. By the time everyone's across, it's 3 a.m., 3 hours behind schedule. Washington pushes forward anyway. 2 columns. 9 miles through snow and sleet. Some soldiers don't have shoes. They wrap their feet in rags. The march leaves bloody footprints in the snow. At 8 a.m., they reach Trenton. The Hessians are asleep, hungover from Christmas celebrations. The attack is a complete surprise. The Americans overwhelm the garrison. Street fighting, cannon fire. Hessians try to organize. Too late. In 90 minutes, it's over. 22 Hessians killed, 83 wounded, 896 captured. American casualties: 2 dead from freezing, 5 wounded. Washington captures weapons, supplies, and most importantly, momentum. Trenton isn't a major military victory. It's a psychological one. It proves the Continental Army can win, that the British aren't invincible, that the revolution isn't dead. Word spreads, soldiers re-enlist, new recruits join. One desperate gamble on Christmas night keeps the revolution alive. January 3rd, 1777. Princeton, New Jersey. Washington does it again. Attacks British forces at Princeton. Another victory. The British withdraw to New York. Abandon most of New Jersey. 2 small victories, but they shift the war. Because Washington realizes we can't win by fighting like the British. We'll lose every pitched battle, but we don't have to win. We just have to survive, outlast them. Guerrilla tactics. Hit and run. Avoid major engagements. Make the war long, expensive, and politically unsustainable for Britain. This isn't about military dominance. It's about endurance. Washington becomes a master of strategic retreat. He loses battles, but preserves his army. Because as long as the Continental Army exists, the revolution exists. Destroy the army, you end the revolution. Keep the army alive, the war continues. September-October 1777. Saratoga, New York. This is the turning point. British General John Burgoyne, leads an army south from Canada. The plan: split New England from the rest of the colonies, cut off the rebellion's heart. But the plan falls apart. Reinforcements don't arrive. Supply lines are cut. American forces surround Burgoyne at Saratoga. October 17, 1777. Burgoyne surrenders. 6,000 British soldiers captured. It's the first major American victory. A full British army defeated and captured. And it changes everything, because France has been watching. France hates Britain. They lost the 7 Years' War, called the French and Indian War in America, in 1763. Lost Canada. Lost territory, lost prestige. They want revenge, but they won't back a losing cause. If America can't win, France won't waste money and soldiers. Saratoga proves America can win. February 6, 1778. France signs a treaty of alliance with the United States. The war just became global. Now Britain isn't just fighting American colonists. They're fighting France. Then Spain joins, 1779. Then the Netherlands, 1780. Britain is fighting a world war. America is just one front. And that's what saves the revolution. Because Britain can't commit everything to America when they're fighting France in Europe, the Caribbean, India. Winter 1777 to 1778. Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. While France is signing treaties, Washington's army is dying. 12,000 soldiers, camped for the winter at Valley Forge, 20 miles from British-occupied Philadelphia. It's hell. No adequate shelter. Men living in makeshift huts, freezing, starving. Supplies aren't arriving. Congress can't provide them. State governments won't. 2,000 soldiers die that winter, not from battle, from disease, exposure, starvation. Washington writes to Congress, unless some great and capital change suddenly takes place, this army must inevitably be reduced to one or other of these three things: starve, dissolve, or disperse. The revolution almost ends at Valley Forge, not from British attack, from neglect. But something else happens that winter. Baron Friedrich von Steuben arrives, a Prussian military officer, experienced, professional. He trains the Continental Army, drill, discipline, standardized tactics, how to load and fire in formation, how to maneuver under fire. He turns farmers into soldiers. By spring 1778, the Continental Army that marches out of Valley Forge is a different force. Still undersupplied, still underpaid, but now they're trained. And with France entering the war, the British strategy shifts. They abandon Philadelphia, consolidate forces, focus on the South, where they believe Loyalist support is stronger. The war enters a new phase, and it's about to get even more brutal. 1778 to 1781, the Southern Campaign. British forces move into Georgia and the Carolinas, capture Savannah, December 1778, and Charleston, May 1780. Charleston is the worst American defeat of the war. 5,000 Continental soldiers captured. The South descends into vicious civil war. Patriots versus Loyalists. Neighbor against neighbor. It's not clean, not honorable. It's brutal. Massacres, reprisals, guerrilla warfare, burning farms, killing civilians. This is the part of the Revolutionary War that doesn't fit the heroic narrative. Leaders like Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, wage guerrilla campaigns, ambush, retreat, disappear into swamps. It's effective, but it's not glorious. Meanwhile, Benedict Arnauld, one of America's best generals, defects to the British, September 1780. The hero of Saratoga becomes a traitor. Why? He feels disrespected, passed over for promotion. Congress doesn't appreciate him, so he tries to hand over West Point to the British. The plot is discovered. Arnold escapes, joins the British Army. His name becomes synonymous with treason. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Arnold had legitimate grievances. Congress treated him poorly. He risked his life repeatedly and got nothing in return. Doesn't justify treason, but it shows how fragile the revolution was. Soldiers were held together by principle, not pay. And when principle wavered, loyalty collapsed. September 28th, October 19th, 1781, Yorktown, Virginia. This is where it ends. British General Lord Cornwallis commands 8,000 troops at Yorktown, a peninsula on the Virginia coast. Washington and French General Rochambeau march south, with 17,000 troops, American and French combined. The French Navy, commanded by Admiral de Grasse, controls Chesapeake Bay, blocking British ships from resupplying or evacuating Cornwallis. Cornwallis is trapped. Washington begins a siege, digging trenches, moving artillery closer, bombarding Yorktown day and night. October 14th, American and French forces assault British redoubts, fortified positions. Hand-to-hand combat, bayonets. Alexander Hamilton leads one of the assaults. He's 24 years old, Washington's aide-de-camp, desperate for combat glory. He gets it. The redoubt falls in 10 minutes. By October 17th, Cornwallis realizes it's over. He sends a drummer and an officer with a white flag. Negotiations. Terms of surrender. October 19th, 1781. Cornwallis surrenders. 8,000 British troops lay down their weapons. The British band reportedly plays "The World Turned Upside Down." It has, but the war doesn't officially end at Yorktown. Fighting continues sporadically. Britain still occupies New York, Charleston, Savannah. Peace negotiations take nearly 2 years. September 3rd, 1783. Treaty of Paris signed. Britain recognizes American independence. Borders defined. British troops evacuate. The war is over. America won. But here's the question. How? How did a collection of farmers, with no navy, no professional army, and no money, defeat the most powerful empire on earth? The answer isn't what you learned in school. 1. America didn't win. Britain quit. By 1781, Britain had been fighting for 6 years. The war was expensive, unpopular, draining resources. And they were fighting France, Spain, and the Netherlands at the same time. Britain could have kept fighting in America, but it wasn't worth the cost. Cornwallis surrendering at Yorktown didn't destroy Britain's military. It destroyed their political will. 2. France won the war. America just survived it. The French provided money, weapons, soldiers, and most importantly, a navy. The reason Cornwallis was trapped at Yorktown? French ships blocked the British Navy. Without France, America loses, definitively. 3. Washington's genius wasn't winning battles. It was keeping the army alive. Washington lost more battles than he won, but he never lost his army. Every time the British thought they'd destroyed the Continental Army, Washington retreated, regrouped, and came back. That endurance, that refusal to quit, is what won the war. 4. Geography saved America. Britain was 3,000 miles away. Every soldier, every weapon, every supply shipment took weeks to cross the Atlantic. America could lose battles and retreat inland. Britain couldn't chase forever. It's the same reason empires always struggle with distant colonies. Logistics eventually kill you. 5. The British never committed fully. They could have sent 100,000 troops. Scorched earth tactics, total war. They didn't, because they saw Americans as fellow subjects, not foreign enemies. And because they were fighting other wars at the same time. If Britain had focused everything on America, the way they would in a true existential war, America would have lost. So America won the Revolutionary War, but at what cost? 25,000 American soldiers dead, 25,000 wounded, unknown number of civilians killed, loyalists, patriots, Native Americans, caught in the middle, economic devastation, inflation, debt, destroyed infrastructure. And independence created immediate problems. The 13 states didn't trust each other, didn't want a strong federal government, couldn't agree on anything. The Articles of Confederation, America's first government, was a disaster. No power to tax, no power to regulate trade, no executive, no national judiciary. Just a loose confederation of states that acted like separate countries. By the mid-1780s, America was collapsing. Economic depression, uprisings, Shays' Rebellion, 1786. States printing their own currency. The Revolution won independence. But it didn't create a functioning country. That would take another crisis, another compromise, another fight. The Constitution, 1787. But that's another story. For now, in 1783, America is free, barely functional, but free. And the Declaration's promise, all men are created equal, is still just words. Slavery remains legal. Women can't vote. Native Americans are being displaced and killed. The war is over. The work of living up to the Declaration has just begun. Washington could have been king. The army would have followed him. Congress would have accepted it. He said no, resigned his commission, went home to Mount Vernon. That decision, walking away from power, is as important as any battle he won, because it proved America was serious about rejecting monarchy, not just Britain's monarchy, all monarchy. And it set a precedent. Leaders serve, then step aside. That precedent holds for 250 years. Until it doesn't. But that's 2026, not 1783. Everything you learned in elementary school about 1776 is oversimplified. Some of it is just wrong. July 4th, 1983. Washington, D.C., President Ronald Reagan gives a speech celebrating the 207th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. He talks about the Founding Fathers, the brave patriots, the noble sacrifice. They knew that freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. It's a beautiful speech, inspiring, patriotic. It's also mythology, not because the sentiment is wrong, but because it presents 1776 as a clean, unified, heroic moment. And 1776 was messy, divided, and deeply hypocritical. Here's what actually happened. Not the version we tell school children, the version that makes us uncomfortable. Myth number 1. The Declaration of Independence was signed on July 4th, 1776. Reality? No, it wasn't. July 4th, 1776. Congress approves the final text. That's it. No signing ceremony. August 2nd, 1776. Most delegates sign the engrossed, fancy handwritten copy. But not all of them. Some delegates weren't present on August 2nd. They sign later, weeks later, months later. Matthew Thornton, delegate from New Hampshire, doesn't sign until November 1776. Elbridge Gerry, Thomas McKean, and others sign at different times. And some delegates who voted for independence in July never signed at all. John Dickinson of Pennsylvania refused to sign. He voted against independence. Once it passed, he left Congress. Robert Livingston of New York helped draft the Declaration, but never signed it. So when you see that famous painting Declaration of Independence by John Trumbull showing all the signers in one room on one day, that never happened. It's an artistic composite, a fantasy. Trumbull painted it in 1818, 42 years after the event. He wasn't there. He imagined it. And that imagined version became the version we remember, because myths are cleaner than reality. Myth number 2. All colonists supported independence. Reality. About 1/3 supported it. 1/3 opposed it. 1/3 didn't care. The patriots, supporters of independence. Maybe 40 to 45% of the white population. The loyalists remained loyal to Britain. 15 to 20%. The "don't involve me" crowd, everyone else. This wasn't a unified uprising. It was a civil war. Loyalists fought for Britain, joined loyalist militias, spied for the crown. After the war, 60,000 to 100,000 loyalists fled America, to Canada, to Britain, to the Caribbean. Their property was confiscated. Families were torn apart. Communities divided. In some regions, the Revolutionary War was neighbor killing neighbor. The Carolinas. Guerrilla warfare. Brutal. Personal. Loyalist militias versus patriot militias. No uniforms. No rules, just violence. The Waxhaws Massacre, May 1780. British forces slaughter Continental soldiers trying to surrender. Over 100 killed. Tarleton's Quarter becomes a phrase. It means no mercy, no prisoners. Reprisals follow. Patriots massacre loyalists. Burn farms. Hang traitors. This isn't the Revolutionary War of paintings and monuments. This is the Revolutionary War of mass graves and refugees. And it's left out of the mythology because it's ugly. Myth number 3. The Founding Fathers believed in equality. Reality. They believed in equality for white male property owners. That's it. All men are created equal. But here's who wasn't included. Women could not vote, could not own property in most states. If married, property belonged to husbands. Could not serve on juries, could not hold office. Abigail Adams writes to her husband John in March 1776, "Remember the ladies, and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors." John Adams responds, "I cannot but laugh." He thought it was a joke. Women won't get the vote for 144 more years. 1920, the 19th Amendment. Enslaved people. The Declaration says all men are created equal. In 1776, 20% of the population is enslaved, about 500,000 people. George Washington owns 317 enslaved people. Thomas Jefferson owns over 600. Jefferson writes, "All men are created equal" in the morning and goes home to a plantation run by slave labor in the evening. He fathers at least 6 children with Sally Hemings, an enslaved woman. She has no choice. She's his property. The Founding Fathers knew slavery was evil. Jefferson calls it a moral depravity and a hideous blot. But he doesn't free his slaves. Not while he's alive. Only 5 are freed in his will. The rest, over 100 people, are sold after his death to pay his debts. Because Jefferson died broke. He spent lavishly his entire life and left massive debts. So the man who wrote "All men are created equal" enslaved people, raped an enslaved woman, and sold her children to pay his debts. That's not taught in elementary school. Native Americans. The Declaration mentions them once as merciless Indian savages. That's the phrase. In the list of grievances against King George III, he has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. Translation: Native Americans are subhuman enemies who murder indiscriminately. That's how the Declaration of Independence describes indigenous people. And after independence, the new American government continues the policies of displacement and extermination. The Indian Removal Act, 1830. Trail of Tears, 1838. Wounded Knee Massacre, 1890. The founding principle, all men are created equal, didn't include Native Americans. And the government spent the next century proving it. Myth number 4. America won the Revolutionary War because of brave Minutemen and patriotic farmers. Reality: France won the war. America just survived long enough for France to help. Let's be clear, American soldiers fought bravely. Many died. Their sacrifice was real. But they didn't win the war alone, not even close. France provided $13 billion in today's dollars. In loans and aid, 12,000 French soldiers. At Yorktown, nearly half the army was French. The French Navy, which trapped Cornwallis at Yorktown. Weapons, uniforms, ammunition, the Continental Army was using French muskets. Spain and the Netherlands also joined the war against Britain. By 1780, Britain is fighting a global war. America is just one front. Britain doesn't lose because America is stronger. Britain quits because continuing isn't worth the cost. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If France doesn't intervene, America loses. The mythology says, plucky colonists beat the empire through courage and determination. The reality says, global geopolitics and French revenge against Britain saved the revolution. Doesn't make American soldiers less brave, but it makes the victory less about American exceptionalism and more about international alliances. The same lesson applies in 2026. America doesn't win wars alone. It never has. Myth number 5. The Founding Fathers were united in their vision. Reality. They hated each other. Constantly. After the war, the founders split into bitter factions. Federalists, Hamilton, Washington, Adams. Strong central government. Federal power. National bank. Democratic Republicans, Jefferson, Madison. Weak central government. States' rights. Agrarian economy. They didn't just disagree. They despised each other. Hamilton calls Jefferson a contemptible hypocrite. Jefferson calls Hamilton a man whose history is a tissue of machinations against the liberty of the country. Adams and Jefferson best friends during the yacht. Revolution don't speak for over a decade after Jefferson defeats Adams in the 1800 election. The newspapers of the era are vicious. Accuse opponents of treason, corruption, and sexual scandals. One paper accuses Jefferson of having an affair with an enslaved woman. They were right. It was Sally Hemings. Another accuses Hamilton of embezzling funds. He wasn't, but he admitted to an extramarital affair to clear his name. This isn't dignified statesmanship. It's mudslinging. And it culminates in July 11, 1804. Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr have a duel. Burr, sitting Vice President of the United States, shoots Hamilton. Hamilton dies the next day. That's how deep the divisions went. Founding fathers literally killing each other. The myth says, wise philosophers debating calmly. The reality says, ambitious politicians fighting for power. Myth number 6. The Constitution was a brilliant, timeless document created by geniuses. Reality. It was a desperate compromise that almost failed to get ratified. The Articles of Confederation, America's first government, 1781 to 1789, were a disaster. No power to tax. No executive. No national judiciary. States acting like separate countries. By 1786, America is collapsing. Shays' Rebellion. Farmers in Massachusetts, crushed by debt, attack courthouses and government buildings. The federal government can't respond. No army, no authority. The revolution survived the British. It might not survive peace. May 1787, Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. 55 delegates, supposed to revise the Articles of Confederation. Instead, they scrap it and write a whole new constitution. In secret, windows closed, doors locked, no press. They debate for 4 months. Compromises stacked on compromises. The Great Compromise. Big states versus small states. Solution. Bicameral legislature. House based on population. Senate equal representation. The 3/5 compromise. How to count enslaved people for representation. Solution. Each enslaved person counts as 3/5 of a person. Not for voting, not for rights. Just for calculating how many representative slave states get in Congress. The more slaves you own, the more political power you have. That's in the Constitution. Article 1, Section 2. It's not removed until the 14th Amendment in 1868, after the Civil War. The Constitution protects slavery. Fugitive Slave Clause. Article 4, Section 2. Escaped slaves must be returned to owners. The Constitution delays ending the slave trade until 1808. Article 1, Section 9. The Constitution is a compromise with evil, and everyone at the convention knew it. George Mason, delegate from Virginia, refuses to sign. Says the Constitution will end either in monarchy or a tyrannical aristocracy. 3 delegates refuse to sign: Mason, Elbridge Gerry, and Edmund Randolph. And getting the states to ratify it? Nearly impossible. New York ratifies by 3 votes, 30 to 27. Virginia ratifies by 10 votes, 89 to 79. Rhode Island doesn't ratify until 1790. A year after the government is already functioning. The Constitution wasn't a stroke of genius. It was a desperate attempt to avoid collapse. And the only reason it passed was the promise of a Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments guaranteeing individual freedoms, which weren't in the original Constitution. Freedom of speech. Not in the original. Freedom of religion? Not in the original. Right to a fair trial? Not in the original. Those had to be added to get enough states to ratify. Myth number 7. The American Revolution created freedom and democracy. Reality. It created a government that took 250 years to start living up to its promises. 1776. Independence declared. All men are created equal. 1787. Constitution ratified. Slavery protected. Women can't vote. Only white male property owners have full rights. 1865. Slavery abolished. 13th Amendment. After 620,000 deaths in the Civil War. 1870. Black men get the vote. 15th Amendment. In theory. In practice, Jim Crow laws and violence suppress it for another 95 years. 1920. Women get the vote. 19th Amendment. 144 years after the Declaration. 1965. Voting Rights Act. Finally enforces the 15th Amendment. 95 years late. 2015. Marriage equality nationwide. Obergefell v. Hodges. Same-sex couples can marry. 239 years after the Declaration. The Revolution didn't create equality. It created the language of equality. And every generation since has used that language to demand inclusion. All men are created equal. Women said, that means us too. Abolitionists said, that means black people too. Civil rights activists said, that means equal treatment under law. LGBTQ activists said, that means marriage equality. The promise was written in 1776. America is still trying to fulfill it in 2026. So why does the myth persist? Why do we tell the sanitized version? Because myths serve a purpose. They create shared identity, national pride, a sense of destiny. We the people sounds better than we the white male property owners who enslaved people and displaced indigenous populations. But the mythology also hides the contradictions. And ignoring contradictions doesn't resolve them. The Civil War happened because the founders kicked the slavery question down the road. Reconstruction failed because America never fully committed to racial equality. Jim Crow lasted a century because the Constitution allowed it. Voting rights are still being fought over in 2026 because the original system excluded most people. The Founding Fathers weren't saints. They were flawed, ambitious, hypocritical men who made a bet that a government based on consent, representation, and written rules could survive its own contradictions. Sometimes the bet pays off. Sometimes it nearly fails. But the words they wrote, all men are created equal, are bigger than they were. And that's why 1776 matters. Not because it was perfect, but because it created a standard to measure against. A standard America has never fully met, but one it can't escape. Thomas Jefferson died on July 4, 1826, exactly 50 years after the Declaration. John Adams died the same day. Hours later, Adams' last words: Thomas Jefferson survives. He didn't. Jefferson had died earlier that morning. Both men friends and enemies, and friends again, died on the 50th anniversary of their greatest achievement. And the country they created was still arguing about what it meant. Still arguing in 2026, 250 years later. Because the revolution never finished. It just passed to the next generation. And the next. And the next. Winning the war was the easy part. Creating a country almost failed. September 3rd, 1783. Treaty of Paris signed. Britain recognizes American independence. The war is over. America is free. Now what? 13 former colonies. 13 separate governments. 13 different currencies. 13 sets of laws. They're not one nation. They're 13 nations that happen to fight the same enemy. And they don't trust each other. New York doesn't trust Virginia. Massachusetts doesn't trust Pennsylvania. Big states don't trust small states. They all fear one thing: tyranny. They just spent 8 years fighting a king. They're not about to create a new one. So they create the weakest possible federal government. The Articles of Confederation, ratified in 1781. And by 1786, America is collapsing. Here's what the Articles of Confederation created: a Congress, one chamber. Each state gets one vote. Doesn't matter if you're Virginia, 747,610 people in 1790, or Delaware, 59,096 people. One state, one vote. But Congress has no power. No power to tax. Can ask states for money. States can say no. Usually do. No power to regulate trade. States tax each other's goods. Economic warfare between states. No executive branch. No president. No one to enforce laws. No national judiciary. No Supreme Court. No way to resolve disputes between states. No power to raise an army. Can ask states to provide soldiers. States can refuse. Basically, Congress can ask nicely. That's it. To pass any significant law, 9 of 13 states must agree. To amend the Articles, all 13 states must agree. Unanimous. One state can block everything. And Rhode Island, the smallest state, blocks everything constantly. This isn't a government. It's a diplomatic conference. And it's failing. By 1785, the economic situation is catastrophic. The war cost money. Lots of money. The Continental Congress borrowed from France, Spain, Netherlands. Borrowed from American citizens. Issued bonds. Made promises. Now the war is over. The debts are due, and Congress has no way to pay them. Can't tax. States won't voluntarily contribute enough. So Congress prints money. Continental dollars. Worthless paper. Hyperinflation. Not worth a continental becomes a phrase meaning worthless. By 1781, continental currency has collapsed. It takes $168 in continental dollars to buy $1 in silver. States start printing their own money. Different currencies in every state. Some states accept other states' money. Most don't. Trade between states becomes a nightmare. Massachusetts requires payment in hard currency gold or silver for taxes. But farmers don't have gold or silver. They have crops, goods, debt. When they can't pay taxes, their farms are seized. Foreclosures, sheriff's auctions. Farmers who fought in the Revolutionary War are losing their land because the government they fought for can't create a stable economy. And they are angry. August 29, 1786, Northampton, Massachusetts. Armed farmers surround the courthouse. They're preventing foreclosure proceedings. Leader, Daniel Shays, a former captain in the Continental Army, fought at Bunker Hill, Ticonderoga, Saratoga. Now he's leading a rebellion against the government he helped create. Shays' rebellion spreads. Western Massachusetts. Farmers attacking courthouses, preventing foreclosures, demanding debt relief. September 1786. 600 armed men shut down the Massachusetts Supreme Court in Springfield. The state government panics, calls up the militia. But the militia is made up of farmers. Many of them sympathize with the rebels. Some militiamen join Shays. January 25, 1787. Shays leads 1,200 men in an attack on the Federal Armory in Springfield. They need weapons. The armory defenders fire artillery, grape shot, into the crowd. 4 rebels killed, 20 wounded. The rebellion collapses. Shays flees to Vermont. Rebels scatter. But the damage is done. George Washington, retired at Mount Vernon, writes to James Madison, "No day was ever more clouded than the present. We are fast verging to anarchy." Thomas Jefferson, in Paris as ambassador to France, has a different take. A little rebellion now and then is a good thing. The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. 2 founding fathers. 2 completely different conclusions. Washington sees chaos, proof that the Articles of Confederation don't work. Jefferson sees democracy, the people exercising their right to resist. Both are right, and both are wrong. Shays' rebellion proves the federal government is too weak to maintain order. But it also proves economic inequality will spark violence. Both problems persist for the next 240 years. May 25, 1787, Philadelphia. Independence Hall. The Constitutional Convention begins. 55 delegates from 12 states. Rhode Island refuses to send anyone. Their mission: revise the Articles of Confederation. What they actually do: scrap it completely. Write a new constitution. In secret. Windows closed, doors locked, guards posted. No press allowed. The public doesn't know what's happening inside. George Washington presides, doesn't say much, just sits there. His presence lends legitimacy. James Madison takes notes, detailed, daily. We know what happened because of Madison. For 4 months, they debate, argue, compromise. The big question: how do you create a government strong enough to function, but not so strong it becomes tyranny? Here are the problems they have to solve. Problem number 1: big states versus small states. Virginia, largest state, wants representation based on population. More people equals more votes. New Jersey, small state, wants equal representation. 1 state, 1 vote. If Virginia wins, big states dominate. Small states become irrelevant. If New Jersey wins, small states can outvote big states even though they have fewer people. The solution: the Great Compromise, also called the Connecticut Compromise. 2 legislative chambers. House of Representatives, based on population. Big states get more seats. Senate, 2 senators per state. Equal representation regardless of size. Every law must pass both chambers. It's a compromise. Nobody's fully happy, but it works. Problem number 2: slavery. Southern states' economies depend on slavery. They won't join a union that threatens it. Northern states, especially Massachusetts and Pennsylvania, are moving toward abolition. The question: do enslaved people count for representation? South says yes. Count them for representation. More people equals more House seats. North says, wait, you don't let them vote. You don't consider them citizens. But you want to count them for political power? The solution: the 3/5 compromise. Enslaved people count as 3/5 of a person for representation and taxation, not for rights, not for citizenship, just for calculating how many House seats slave states get. It's written into Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution. Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states. according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons. 3/5 of all other persons. Other persons. That's how the Constitution refers to enslaved people. Not even using the word slave, just other persons. It's morally grotesque and politically necessary. Because without Southern states, there's no union. And without the 3/5 compromise, Southern states won't ratify. So the Constitution protects slavery to preserve unity. And it gets worse. Fugitive Slave Clause, Article 4, Section 2. No person held to service or labor in one state, under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party, to whom such service or labor may be due. Translation. If an enslaved person escapes to a free state, they must be returned to their owner. Free states are legally required to return escaped slaves. The Constitution doesn't just tolerate slavery, it enforces it nationwide. Article 1, Section 9. Congress can't ban the importation of enslaved people until 1808, 20 years. In 1787, the founders knew slavery was wrong. They wrote it into the Constitution anyway, because ending slavery would mean no Constitution, and no Constitution might mean no country. So they compromised with evil, and the bill comes due in 1861. Civil War, 620,000 dead. Problem number 3, how much power should the federal government have? Some delegates, Federalists like Hamilton, want a strong central government, national bank, standing army, federal power over states. Others, anti-federalists like Patrick Henry, fear centralized power. Give me liberty or give me death. Strong states. Weak federal government. The solution. Federalism, shared power. Federal government controls interstate commerce, foreign policy, currency, national defense, treaties. States control education, criminal law, local government, elections, mostly. And the 10th Amendment, added later. Powers not delegated to the United States are reserved to the states. It's vague, intentionally. And Americans have been arguing about it for 240 years. States' rights versus federal authority. It's the core tension of American government. Slavery, states' rights until the Civil War. Civil rights, federal authority, 1960s, marriage equality, federal authority, 2015. Abortion rights, states, 2022. Dobbs' decision overturns Roe. The Constitution doesn't resolve the question. It just creates a framework for fighting about it forever. September 17th, 1787. The Constitutional Convention ends. 39 delegates sign. 3 refuse: George Mason, Elbridge Gerry, Edmund Randolph. Ben Franklin, 81 years old, gives a speech. I confess that there are several parts of this Constitution which I do not at present approve, but I am not sure I shall never approve them. I consent, sir, to this Constitution because I expect no better, and because I am not sure that it is not the best. Translation: it's not perfect, but it's the best we're going to get. Now they have to convince the states to ratify it, and that's where it almost fails. The ratification fight is brutal. 9 of 13 states must ratify for the Constitution to take effect. Federalists support the Constitution. Hamilton, Madison, Washington, quietly. Anti-Federalists oppose it. Patrick Henry, George Mason, Samuel Adams. The Anti-Federalist argument: the Constitution creates a tyrannical central government. No Bill of Rights. No protection for individual freedoms. The president is basically a king. Patrick Henry: this Constitution is said to have beautiful features, but they appear to me horribly frightful. Among other deformities, it has an awful squinting. It squints towards monarchy. The Federalist argument: the Articles of Confederation failed. Shays' Rebellion proves we need a stronger government. The Constitution has checks and balances. Tyranny can't happen. Hamilton, Madison, and John Jay write the Federalist Papers. 85 essays, published in newspapers, arguing for ratification. It's the greatest work of political philosophy written in America, and most people didn't read it. Too long, too dense. The real fight happens in state conventions. Delegates elected to vote yes or no. December 7, 1787, Delaware ratifies. First state, unanimous. December 12th, Pennsylvania ratifies. 46 to 23, December 18th, New Jersey, unanimous. Easy states, small states. States that benefit from a stronger union. Then it gets harder. June 21st, 1788, New Hampshire ratifies. 57-47. That's 9 states. The Constitution is officially ratified. But there's a problem. Virginia and New York haven't ratified yet. And without Virginia, largest state, and New York, wealthiest state, the Union doesn't work. June 25th, 1788, Virginia ratifies. 89 to 79. 10-vote margin. July 26th, 1788, New York ratifies. 30-27. 3-vote margin. 3 votes. That's how close the Constitution came to failing in New York. If 3 delegates vote differently, New York rejects it. The Union splits. America might become 2 or 3 separate countries. It was that close. Rhode Island doesn't ratify until May 29, 1790. The government is already functioning. George Washington has been president for over a year. Rhode Island joins because the alternative is being an independent country surrounded by the United States. Not exactly enthusiastic support. But even with ratification, there's a problem. The Constitution has no Bill of Rights. No guarantee of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, right to a fair trial. The Anti-Federalists refused to support it without those protections. The Federalists promised, "We'll add them. Just ratify first. Trust us." And they did. 1789. The first Congress proposes 12 amendments. 1791. 10 are ratified. The Bill of Rights. First Amendment. Freedom of speech, religion, press, assembly, petition. Second Amendment. Right to bear arms. Third Amendment. No quartering soldiers, response to British pre-war policy. Fourth Amendment. No unreasonable searches and seizures. Fifth through eighth. Rights of the accused, fair trial, no cruel punishment. Ninth Amendment. Rights not listed are still retained by the people. 10th Amendment. Powers not given to federal government belong to states. These amendments, added 2 years after the Constitution, are the only reason many states ratified. The Constitution without the Bill of Rights would have failed. So here's what America created between 1783 and 1791. A federal system with shared power between states and central government. A republic, not a democracy, with elected representatives. A constitution that protects slavery while declaring all men created equal. A government strong enough to function, but limited enough to, theoretically, prevent tyranny. It's a compromise, a patchwork, an experiment, and nobody knows if it will work. George Washington, inaugurated as first president in 1789, writes, "The preservation of the sacred fire of liberty and the destiny of the Republican model of government are staked on the experiment entrusted to the hands of the American people." Translation: we're trying something that's never been done. It might fail, and it nearly did, multiple times. The Civil War 1861-1865. The Constitution couldn't hold the country together. 620,000 died. The Great Depression, 1929 to 1939. Economic collapse almost destroyed democracy. FDR expanded federal power massively to save it. Watergate, 1974. A president tried to become a dictator. The system barely stopped him. January 6, 2021, an attempted coup, the first time a president refused to accept election results. The Constitution survived, barely, but the founders knew it wasn't permanent. Jefferson said, "Every constitution naturally expires at the end of 19 years. He believed each generation should write its own constitution. America didn't. We're still using the one written in 1787, amended 27 times, interpreted endlessly, stretched to cover situations the founders never imagined. And 250 years later, we're still arguing about what it means, because the founders didn't create a perfect system. They created a flawed system that could be improved. The question is, will it be? 250 years later, America is still arguing about what 1776 means, because the revolution never finished. July 4th, 1826, Quincy, Massachusetts, and Monticello, Virginia. Two men die on the same day, exactly 50 years after they signed the Declaration of Independence. John Adams, 90 years old, dies at his home in Quincy. His last words, "Thomas Jefferson survives." He doesn't. Thomas Jefferson died 5 hours earlier at Monticello, age 83. Two founding fathers, friends, then enemies, then friends again, both dead on the 50th anniversary of their greatest achievement. And the country they created, still broken. In 1826, slavery is still legal, will be for 39 more years. Women still can't vote, won't for 94 more years. Native Americans are being forcibly removed from their lands. The Trail of Tears is 7 years away. The promise of 1776, all men are created equal, is still just a promise. And 200 years later, in 2026, America is still trying to fulfill it. Here's what 1776 actually gave America. Not freedom, not equality, not democracy. An idea, a standard, a promise written on paper. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. 35 words that have been fought over for 250 years, because the founders wrote those words and then immediately violated them. They enslaved people, excluded women, displaced Native Americans, restricted voting to white male property owners. The promise and the reality were opposites. But here's the thing, the promise survived, and every excluded group used those same words to demand inclusion. 1848, Seneca Falls, New York, the first women's rights convention in America. Elizabeth Cady Stanton reads the Declaration of Sentiments. It's modeled directly on the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal. She's using the founders' own words against them. The convention demands voting rights, property rights, equal education, equal employment. It takes 72 years. But on August 18, 1920, the 19th Amendment is ratified. Women get the vote. 144 years after the Declaration. 1857. Dred Scott v. Sanford, Supreme Court decision. Dred Scott, an enslaved man, sues for freedom. He lived in free states for years. Argues that makes him free. The Supreme Court rules against him. Chief Justice Roger Taney writes, "Black people are not included and were not intended to be included under the word citizens in the Constitution." Translation: all men are created equal doesn't mean black people. Never did. It's the law. The Supreme Court said so. 4 years later, the Civil War starts. 620,000 Americans die. The bloodiest war in U.S. history. December 6, 1865. The 13th Amendment is ratified. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States. Slavery is abolished. 89 years after the Declaration. But the 13th Amendment has an exception. except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. Slavery is legal if you've been convicted of a crime. Southern states immediately pass black codes, laws targeting black people, vagrancy, loitering, unemployment. Arrest them, convict them, force them into labor. It's slavery by another name. And it's legal. And in 2026, America has the highest incarceration rate in the world. 2.3 million people in prison, disproportionately black. The 13th Amendment's exception is still being used. 1868, 14th Amendment. All persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States. This overturns Dred Scott. Black people are citizens. No state shall deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Equal protection. It's in the Constitution now, but it's not enforced. Jim Crow laws, segregation, separate but equal, poll taxes, literacy tests, violence. For 100 years after the Civil War, the 14th Amendment is ignored in the South. 1963, August 28th, Washington, D.C., 250,000 people gather at the Lincoln Memorial. The March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Martin Luther King Jr. delivers the most famous speech in American history. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. He's not quoting the Constitution. He's quoting the Declaration. Because the Declaration made a promise, and he's demanding America keep it. 1964, Civil Rights Act, bans segregation, bans employment discrimination. 1965, Voting Rights Act, bans literacy tests, poll taxes, and other tactics suppressing black voters. 188 years after the Declaration. But in 2013, the Supreme Court guts the Voting Rights Act. Shelby County v. Holder. Within hours, states begin passing new voting restrictions. In 2026, voting rights are still being fought over. Because the revolution never finished. 2015, June 26th, Obergefell v. Hodges. The Supreme Court rules that same-sex couples have the right to marry. Justice Anthony Kennedy writes, "The Constitution promises liberty to all within its reach. A liberty that includes certain specific rights that allow persons within a lawful realm to define and express their identity. Marriage equality, nationwide, 239 years after the Declaration." Another excluded group, using the language of 1776 to demand inclusion. But in 2026, some states are already trying to roll it back. Because every expansion of rights creates backlash. Every generation has to fight the same battles again. So what does 1776 mean in 2026? It depends who you ask. For some Americans, 1776 means freedom from tyranny, individual rights, limited government, the right to bear arms, Second Amendment, ratified 1791, based on colonial militias. American exceptionalism, the idea that America is uniquely great. For others, 1776 means a promise still unfulfilled hypocrisy, declaring equality while owning slaves. A system that excluded most people and still does. The beginning of genocide against Native Americans. A revolution that didn't go far enough. Both are right, because 1776 is paradox. The founders declared universal human equality while denying it in practice. They created a system based on consent of the governed while excluding most people from governing. They wrote, "All men are created equal," and then spent the next sentence listing grievances against a king. They rebelled against tyranny and then compromised with slaveholders to preserve the Union. Every American contradiction starts in 1776. Let's talk about what 1776 didn't create. 1776 didn't create democracy. The founders feared democracy, mob rule, tyranny of the majority. They created a republic, representative government, filtered through elections, electoral college, appointed senators, until the 17th Amendment in 1913. The people don't vote directly on laws. They vote for representatives who vote on laws. And even that was restricted. In 1789, only white male property owners could vote, maybe 6% of the population. Women, no. Enslaved people, no. Free black people, usually no. Native Americans, no. White men without property, no. By 2026, voting has expanded, but it's still restricted. Felons can't vote in many states. Voter ID laws, gerrymandering, electoral college that can override the popular vote. America still isn't a full democracy. It's a republic with democratic elements, and we're still arguing about how democratic it should be. 1776 didn't create separation of church and state. The First Amendment, 1791, says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's not in the Declaration. It's added 15 years later, and the interpretation has shifted constantly. In 1776, many states had official religions. Massachusetts was Congregationalist. Virginia was Anglican. Slowly, this establishment happened. But religious tests for office existed into the 1800s. In 2026, Christian nationalism is resurgent. Efforts to put religion back into government, school prayer, 10 commandments in courtrooms. The founders would have opposed this, but people claim it's what the founders wanted. Because 1776 is interpreted through the lens of whoever's doing the interpreting. 1776 didn't create economic equality, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Not life, liberty, and the guarantee of happiness. Pursuit, you're free to try. Success, not guaranteed. The founders were wealthy landowners. They didn't envision economic redistribution. Thomas Jefferson wanted an agrarian republic of small farmers, each owning land, self-sufficient. Alexander Hamilton wanted industrial capitalism, banks, factories, national debt as a tool of growth. Hamilton won. And by 2026, America has the highest wealth inequality in the developed world. 3 people: Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, at various times, have more wealth than the bottom 50% of Americans combined. The system the founders created allows this, protects it, because 1776 was about political freedom, not economic equality. 1776 didn't end imperialism. It just changed who was doing it. The British Empire displaced Native Americans. The United States continued it. Indian Removal Act, 1830. Forced relocation of native tribes. Trail of Tears. Thousands died. Manifest Destiny. The belief that America was destined to expand across the continent. Justified genocide. By 1890, the Indian Wars are over. Native population, 250,000. Down from an estimated 5 to 15 million before European contact. The American Revolution didn't liberate Native Americans. It accelerated their destruction. And America's imperial expansion didn't stop at the continent. 1898, Spanish-American War. America takes Puerto Rico, Philippines, Guam, 1945 to 1991. Cold War. America intervenes in dozens of countries. Coups, wars, proxy conflicts. 2001 to 2021. War on Terror. Afghanistan, Iraq, and 85 other countries with U.S. military presence. The country that declared independence from an empire became an empire. All men are created equal as long as they're American. So after 250 years, what's the legacy? The promise is still unfulfilled, but the promise still exists. And that matters, because you can't demand what was never promised. The civil rights movement succeeded because the Declaration said, all men are created equal. The Constitution said, equal protection under the law. Those words didn't exist. The legal argument collapses. Women's suffrage succeeded because the Declaration said people have rights. The Constitution says, we the people. LGBTQ rights succeeded because the 14th Amendment says equal protection. The Declaration says unalienable rights. Every expansion of rights uses the language of 1776, not because 1776 created equality, but because 1776 promised it. And promises can be enforced. Hypocrisy can be exposed. Standards can be applied. The founders were hypocrites. Slaveholders declaring freedom. Wealthy landowners declaring equality. But the words they wrote were bigger than they were. And those words have been used by people the founders never considered fully human to demand inclusion. July 4th, 2026, the 250th anniversary. America will celebrate. Fireworks, parades, speeches. Politicians will quote the Declaration. Call America the greatest country on earth. Talk about freedom and democracy. And none of it will be entirely true. America isn't the freest country. Ranks 17th in the Human Freedom Index, 2023. Not a full democracy. Ranks as a flawed democracy. Economist Intelligence Unit, 2024. Economic mobility lower than most developed nations. Incarceration rate, highest in the world. Wealth inequality, worst among developed nations. The promise of 1776 that all people are created equal and have the right to pursue happiness has not been fulfilled. But it hasn't been abandoned either, because every generation inherits the same fight. Expand the promise or restrict it. Include more people or protect the status quo. Live up to the words or explain them away. The founders chose hypocrisy. Wrote all men are created equal while enslaving people. Every generation since has had to choose. Repeat the hypocrisy or fix it. Rick Rescorla, on September 11, 2001, saved 2,700 people by ignoring orders and acting on principle. That's the 1776 spirit. Individual action, moral courage. Standing up when institutions fail. But 1776 also created the institutions. Imperfect, hypocritical, but capable of improvement. The question is, will they improve or collapse? Because systems don't last forever. The Roman Republic, 482 years. The British Empire, 400 years if you count from the late 1500s. The Soviet Union, 69 years. The American experiment, 250 years. And counting. Every empire thinks it's permanent. None are. The founders knew this. Jefferson said the Constitution should be rewritten every 19 years. We didn't. We're using a system designed for 13 agricultural states with 4 million people applied to 50 states with 330 million people in a globalized digital world. And we're arguing about what men in powdered wigs would have thought about the internet, climate change, and nuclear weapons. That's not sustainable. So what's the answer? There isn't one. That's the point. 1776 didn't solve problems. It created a process for solving them. Representation, elections, amendment, courts, debate, compromise, imperfect, slow, frustrating, but better than monarchy, better than dictatorship, better than collapse. The founders didn't create a perfect union. They created a more perfect union. The work is never done. Every generation gets a choice. Expand the promise, or let it die. In 1860, America chose civil war over ending slavery peacefully. 620,000 dead. In 1964, America chose civil rights over continued segregation. Progress. In 2021, America survived an attempted coup. Barely. In 2026, America turns 250, and the same question the founders faced is still unanswered. Can a country founded on the idea that all people are created equal actually make that true? Or will it remain a beautiful lie? 250 years later, the revolution isn't finished. It's just passed to us.